habits are what keep me on my path. So it's fine that you set goals. It's fine that you set outcomes and targets, but it's really the system that keeps us focused on this process. And so habits are the process to the goals. If I don't do these routines, if I don't do these habits, there's no way for me to reach this goal. So I want to back up. So this habit map is nothing more than you walking through a map of setting up your goals for 90 days, for a year, and then reverse engineering, okay, what are the habits that are going to get me to these goals?
All right, everybody, welcome back. It is your host, Brad Blazer. A lot of people call me a lot of things, but I am known as the Robin Hood of information. I take information from people that have it, like our next guest, and I try to share it with people that need it the most. Welcome to Beast Nation. Today's guest is an individual that ditched his 12-year as a gym owner, 20-year personal training career in pursuit of a new and better lifestyle and a career calling. Habit-based lifestyle was created by Jesse out of his life experiences as an athlete, as a businessman, as a trainer, husband, and father. Recently, he picked his family up and moved from Washington State all the way down to Orange County, California, to inspire people to live life on their own terms. He is the author of a great book called Man in the Mirror, and more importantly, he is a high-performance coach. I'd like you all to give a big welcome to our guest today, Mr. Jesse Ewell. Jesse, welcome to Beast Nation, my friend.
Hey, thank you very much, man. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. You know, before we really dig in to the meat and potatoes, why don't you share a little bit about your past and kind of, you know, where you were in life before you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so kind of my story started out as, you know, I grew up in Spokane, Washington, and my parents had 25 acres. We kind of grew up in a rural area. I was very into sports. That was kind of where I shined and kind of found my value, let's just say. And through that, working out was kind of something that I was always very passionate about. You know, this goes all the way, you know, back to high school. As you know, I was in amateur boxing for almost 9 years. I played football. You know, I played a lot of different sports, and that was really where I felt the most comfortable. But I can remember being in high school, you know, 17 years old, drawing out diagrams of gyms that I would, you know, one day own. And, you know, back then there wasn't any personal training facilities, but I knew I wanted to start a gym. I knew what I kind of wanted it to look like. But the big thing is I had a vision of owning my own gym one day. And, you know, fast forward to, you know, being around 21, 22. And I remember having a conversation with my parents, and I'm like, listen, I want to be a personal trainer. And, you know, they're like, hey, that's not really a job. That's a hobby. And, you know, as I started to get into the industry, it was something I didn't do very good in school. I went to college long enough to play some football, and just I had a really hard time with school, to be honest with you. I felt like I was always thinking about other things, but when I found things that I was passionate about, I went all in with them. And so I went all in with personal training, started doing it. And when I first started doing it, I made like zero money. In fact, I started out as I moved to Puyallup, Washington, and ended up getting a job at an airport, by an airport that was about an hour and a half drive away. Every day I had to go there just to work at this gym. And one of the things that for about 8 months I worked at this gym, and it cost me more to drive there than it did what I actually made. But what it did is it really got me to where I was, I was committed. I knew what I wanted to do. I was all in with it. I wasn't making any money. And I knew I had to change some things. And so I ended up, stopping there after about 8 months, and I got a job at another gym. And back then we called them box gyms. Now you'll know of them kind of like LA Fitness, 24-hour, things like that. But I remember going in for an interview, and I really needed this training job because I was kind of like, I was basically broke at the time. And I walk in and the guy's like, listen, you're kind of quiet. You're kind of reserved. I don't know if you can actually do this job. You look the part, but I don't know if you can really do this. And at the time I'm thinking, man, do I like punch this guy, or, do I want the job? And he's like, listen, I need you to go out and meet 5 people, and I need you to come back and tell me their name, what their goal is and where they're from. And so I went out and I met these 5 people, and I came back and I told them, and I said, listen, here's their goals. Here's where they're from. Here's how long they've been working out. And I really started to give him a lot of details about the people. And he's like, wow, you learned all that in that short amount of time? And I said, yeah. And he's like, well, what did you do? And I said, I just went out, introduced myself, and told them what I did and what I was about. And, for them to tell me, who they were and what they're about, why they were here. And he's like, okay, so you're hired. I get the job, and I start out as kind of the janitor trainer, which is the guy who doesn't have any clients, but's like kind of in charge of cleaning equipment all day long. And so as I did that for about the first 30 days, I just went around and introduced myself to people. I asked a lot of people if they needed help. Most people kind of ignored me and turned me down. And so by the second month, I was still doing the same thing. And this time, those same people now started to, know me. They started to like me, and they started to have deeper conversations. They started to let me show them a better way to do an exercise or a movement. And they started to really kind of talk back and interact with me. And by the third month, I ended up being the top trainer in the company. I sold the most training in our company at the time in the state of Washington.
Wow.
And that was like 9 or 10 clubs. By the fourth month, I was the top trainer in the company. And that was out of like 18 clubs between Washington and Arizona. And at that point, I really learned and realized what it took to be a trainer. And it was about communicating with people. It was about getting to know them. It was about knowing what their goals are, why they were there, and really getting them to like you and trust you. And I was very good at just communicating with people. I was very good at getting people to believe that I could get them results that they couldn't get on their own, and I could get them faster than they could on their own. And so, that's kind of how I started in the industry. And I worked for this company for almost 5 years. I went from being, the janitor trainer to the general manager in about a year and a half. And I started selling memberships and just started understanding the business side of it. I did that. And then about 5 years into it, when I turned 27, me and my wife, I just said, hey, listen, I know the business side of this. I know I can sell. I know I can get people results. I want to start our own training facility. And at the time, the gym was getting ready to sell to LA Fitness. And we just made the move, and we started down this path of opening up our own business. And we created a lot of success very quickly. And I wanted, control over what I made. I want to control over my results, and I want to control over how much money that I could ultimately, make by being an entrepreneur. So, so that kind of started, me down the business path of me and my wife opening up our own gyms. We had them for 13 years. We went through about 5 expansions and opened up two other facilities. And I turned it into a two multi-million dollar training facilities. And I had an opportunity to go through a program called Wake Up Warrior about 5 years ago. And as I went through that, I really started to transform my life as a husband, father, leader, businessman, I was, kind of one of those guys that got really sucked into working long hours, trying to build the business. And I forgot about my wife and I forgot about my kids along the way because I was just trying to figure it out. And throughout that, me and my wife became pretty disconnected. We were more like roommates than teammates, I like to call it.
Yep.
And so, we had I got a call one day at work that my wife was having kind of a nervous breakdown. She was really stressed and she didn't feel like she could tell me what was going on with her, but she was really hurting and in a lot of pain,
Mm-hmm.
and basically said, "Hey, I feel like we're living like two separate lives. I feel like if I tell you what's really going on with me, you're going to leave me. You're not going to love me." And I remember being kind of annoyed that I got the phone call at work. And when I showed up at the counselor's office, they kind of told me everything. And it was like, I knew I needed to make a change. And so that's when I went through, Warrior Week at the time, which was about 5 years ago. And, I learned how to be a better husband, father, leader, businessman going through this program. And I knew at that point that my pain would eventually be my power.
Mm.
And so the only truly way that I felt like I could turn that pain into power is to begin helping other men
Love it.
through that same thing. And so I started coaching men in a program called Project Alpha that I started about 6-7 months later. And I was coaching mainly, men out of my gyms that wanted to, be more, do more, and live to their full potential. And then I got an opportunity. I stayed in Warrior and I got an opportunity to coach, as a coach for them and take guys through Warrior Week and lead them through the program. And then I even became a certified trainer. And then throughout that whole time, that's where I really started to see that, hey, there's this opportunity I have to lead men to be better husband, fathers, and leaders. This is what I'm super passionate about. And I got really burned out on the gym, just the whole thing. It's like, I got tired of talking to people about, just lifting weights and like diets. And it's like, hey, this isn't the real reason why you're struggling with these things. Let's get into the deeper stuff. And the people that were successful was the people that I was getting into the deeper stuff with.
Sure.
The people that tend to be not so successful, the people that just came in for, a workout. And so it was an easy transition for me to go into the coaching because that's what most of my successful clients were talking about. And so kind of got to a place about, it's been almost 2 years now, but to where I had to choose, do I sell my business and go full into coaching? At the time I was moving to Southern California to be working for Warrior.
Yep.
And I made the decision to move down here, my whole family, and work for Wake Up Warrior. And then about 6 months after we moved here, I kind of decided I wanted to do my own thing. And, I started Habit-Based Lifestyle, launched my book about 1.5 years ago. And that kind of gives you a little background on just where I started and where I am and what got me to where I am today.
I love it. Great journey. There's a lot of information in what you just shared, and really 3 or 4 what I call kind of golden nuggets that I want to dig a little deeper into. You mentioned that when you were much younger, you kind of had this goal or this vision of wanting to eventually at some day own your own gym.
Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer in the coaching that I do, that anything big in life really starts with goals.
Right.
Harvard did a study many years ago where they put together a group of a couple hundred people, and they asked the group, how many of you have actually taken the time to physically write your goals down in writing on a piece of paper? And what they found is, out of this group of a couple hundred, there was only 3% that did that. There was roughly another, 13 or 14% that said, yeah, I've got goals, they're floating around in my head. But as I like to tell people, goals without action are nothing but dreams.
Right.
You did something back when you were very young, which was you had this goal, and then you actually, of course, followed through on it by taking action. And ultimately, of course, that goal became a reality for you, where you became a very, very successful gym owner. You've got these things that you refer to as habit maps that people can
Yeah.
get their hands on. I know they're on Amazon. Can you kind of just in maybe 3 to 5 minutes explain what your habit maps are and how they can help people and what they're really designed to do?
Yeah, let me just kind of explain kind of like where I come from on goals. So like you're right, like when I was 17, one of the most important things is I had a vision, I had a goal, I had an outcome that I was working on. And so I learned at a very young age is, one of my biggest things was one day, yes, I wanted to open a gym. Another thing was I wanted to play college football, which I did. I wanted to be an all-state football player. And I did those things. But what I often found is I would set a goal and then kind of get there and be like, okay, well, now what? And it was like, okay, now I got to set a bigger goal. But I didn't tell you about what happened when I got to college, I played, and it was like I set this goal and this goal set me on the path.
Mm.
Okay? It set me on the path, got me focused on the outcome. But once I hit the outcome, I was kind of always like, okay, well, I did this, but now what? And one of the things that I learned early on is you had to set another goal or another outcome after you completed one, because I would get into a place when I got to college, I was like, okay, like I'm playing football, I'm doing this, but then now what?
What's the next goal?
And I went through this transition of about 3 or 4 years of, a really hard time in my life because I didn't really have a goal. It was like I had accomplished everything I'd wanted to a certain extent, but I didn't keep like resetting goals. And so I really learned when I started working for a gym is one of the owners taught us is like, hey, you got to create this vision, which I had no problem doing. I got that, but it was like you have to continually recreate that vision over and over and constantly be working on that. And so if maybe some of your listeners are here, it's like, man, I've created goals and I've hit them, but I've always kind of stopped after I hit them. And it was like I didn't keep resetting them. But goals really keep you on the path, or they at least set the path. So what I think about it is a goal will set you on this path and say, okay, here's where I want to go. But habits are what keep us on the path.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really pay attention early on that I had, a lot of these habits like working out. I was working out sometimes 2 times a day. I was, eating right. I was doing all these things that I was early on, and I didn't recognize what they actually were doing for me. But these were the foundations of what habit-based lifestyle is today. Luckily I did have working out because, who knows what I would have been doing if I didn't have that. But so my habits are what keep me on my path. So it's fine that you set goals. It's fine that you set outcomes and targets, but it's really the system that keeps us focused on this process. And so habits are the process to the goals. If I don't do these routines, if I don't do these habits, there's no way for me to reach this goal. So I want to back up. So this habit map is nothing more than you walking through a map of setting up your goals for 90 days, for a year, and then reverse engineering, okay, what are the habits that are going to get me to these goals?
Right.
So what I did is I created a map that said, okay, listen, here's what I want. And remember this, want is a mid-level commitment. There's 7 levels of commitment, okay, that I teach inside a habit-based lifestyle. Want is in the middle, okay? And everybody's always like, what do I want? What do I want? What do I want? What do I want? That's a mid-level commitment. What I want to get people to, or what I work on getting people to, is a desire or choose or I would love to. So I desire to, I choose to, I love to when it comes to setting goals, because wanting is kind of like, okay, like I'm half committed. Like lots of people want stuff and they don't work towards it. But
Right.
when you start saying things like, hey, I desire to get to this place, or I choose to get to this place, or I love to get to this place, that changes how we start showing up.
Right.
And then we have a lot of these other commitments that are like, hey, I have to, I need to, or I should, which are really at the low end of the commitment. That's almost like the reptilian brain kicking in and just, it's something we say, but we're really not committed to it. So the habit map was something I created so I could keep myself on track.
Mm.
And knowing that, hey, if I could do this, anybody could do this. And so everything I set up inside a habit-based lifestyle was things that I set up for myself that brought me the most success. And then all the people I coached, all the people I trained the last 20 years, I really put all of that into that book and said, okay, listen, what really got me to this place? So, and that's really what the habit map, kind of came from. So,
It's interesting that you've got what you call the habit map. I've got something similar that we use that people can get called our Beast Goal Planning Guide that breaks down the goal process and says basically that goals have to kind of follow the acronym SMART, where each one of the letters stands for something. S is specific, M is measurable, A is the goal has to be actionable. You have to be able to take actions. R is realistic. And then, of course, T stands for time bound. I want to accomplish this goal in the next 9 months or
right.
in the next year. But you mentioned something that I really believe, because we've actually trademarked the phrase, the art of beliefology, which is the concept that if you change your beliefs, you can change your future. And in the coaching that I've done, what I find very similar to what you've just preached, Jesse, is that to be successful in life, it's just a matter of creating habits. You
Right.
have to see yourself as a bigger person and have a brighter future, but you're never going to get there unless you create habits. And a good example is I had a guy that hired me as a coach, and he was a beastly overweight. He was probably 80 pounds overweight. And one of the things that we agreed to on our coaching was I was going to coach him to help him lose weight. Now, I'm not a trainer. I've never owned a gym. I don't have your background. I certainly don't look like you. But when he finally committed, I said, great, let's start tonight on losing weight. I said, tomorrow morning, I want you to get up an hour early. And I said, can you do that? And he said, yeah, I can get up an hour early. And I said, great. And then I want you to go for a 3-mile jog. And he started laughing like, are you crazy? I can't even make it to the end of the block. And I said, I know, I was just joking with you. But I said, here's what I do want you to do. I still want you to get up an hour early, and I want you to walk for 30 minutes, just briskly. You can walk, can't you? Yeah, I can walk. Just briskly swing your arms for 30 minutes. Do that for 3 days. On the 4th day, what I want you to do as you're walking is look at the telephone poles or look at the light poles. And you're going to walk from one to the next, and then you're going to lightly jog from that pole to the next. And you're just going to alternate pole to pole, walk, jog, walk, jog. Do that for 3 days. And then again on the 4th, I want you to increase the distance to 2 poles and just continue to do this. Well, of course, what happened a month later, the guy's jogging 3 to 4 miles a day now, right?
Right.
And so we had our follow-up strategy call, and he said, I'll never forget you telling me that the 2 most important, powerful words in the entire human language are the words I am, followed by whatever it is you believe. And in the
Sure.
morning, whenever I looked at myself in the mirror, before you started coaching me, Brad, is what I was and what I saw myself as. I kept saying, I am an ugly fat person. But he said, today, when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw something different. And I said, what was that? He said, I saw an athlete looking back at me for the very first time. He said, I can't thank you. He lost about 60 pounds over the course of this journey. And I said, bingo. I said, it's because what we've done is we've created the habits and instilled those over the last few weeks of what an athlete does every day. They wake up, they exercise, and they eat nutritiously. And now that you've got a belief system of seeing yourself as an athlete, what are the habits of athletes? So his beliefs changed. He now sees himself as an athlete, but more important is he's now fostering within his personal life the habits, which you obviously are an expert on because your whole coaching program is called a habit-based lifestyle. And I said to this guy, Steve, I have no doubt in my mind the other 20 to 30 pounds are going to drop right off you within a matter of weeks, because now you see yourself as an entirely different person. And that's what a good coach and a good trainer can do. We see potential in people, as you know, because you've been doing this, that they don't see in themselves.
Right.
And then we unlock that so that they can start seeing it as they start seeing results. And that's, I think, so important. Now, I want to touch upon something else that I think can really help everybody, because I went through this in my own life. I was
Right.
an A-type driven businessman, hunting and grinding, and there was a disconnect between my wife and myself. We were, like you just said, living like roommates. You were fortunate that you were able to make the connection again. And I know you've got a great program where you're now coaching couples and you're bringing couples together and you're doing some great things. How did you reconnect after growing distant? Was it just sitting down and talking about it? Was it understanding as a man that I needed to do something and change? Because so many men and women are leaving a life where they're disconnected, like you and your wife were, and they just don't know how to bring that marriage back together and create unity again as a couple. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So one of the things is, as men or even, women, there is no blueprint on being married. There is no blueprint on how to be a husband or be a wife. At least there wasn't, and I think
You invented the blueprint.
I think I have a pretty good one that worked for me. But what I will tell you is this: there's two people in a relationship, but there's only one that you can control, and that is yourself. And there's only one that you can take responsibility for, and that is you. And there's only one that you can take ownership for. So number one is you have to establish, what do you want in your marriage? What do you want? And you have to be relentlessly committed to getting what you want, because a lot of times what happens is like, well, what if my wife doesn't want this?
Yeah.
And it's like, you got to just be focused on what you want in the beginning. So it's like, if I want to change my marriage, I have to change how I show up in my marriage. So one of the ways that I changed how I showed up is said, okay, listen, I'm going to leave my wife a video every single day. So I'm going to pull out my phone and I'm going to tell her how much, I love her, how much I appreciate her, how much she means to me. And I'm going to give her specific, detailed reasons why. I'm not just going to say, hey, I love you. I'm not going to text her and say this, although some people do that. But I'm going to leave her a message because that's not something that I would normally do. And so about 5.5 years ago, I started doing this, and I start leaving them every day videos.
Wow.
I started learning my wife's love language. We have 5 love languages. We have words of affirmation, physical touch, gifts, quality time, acts of service. I started understanding what she wanted. I started understanding her love languages, and I started speaking them, not just when I felt like it, every single day. And so I went on and did this. I've been doing this for about 5.5 years. I haven't stopped. In fact, I do it. I did it again today. I do it every day. And yes, there's been some days where I was like, I really don't want to leave my wife a message. I'm not feeling really good about her, but I stayed committed to it and I kept doing it. That was the first thing. Second thing was I started taking my wife on a date every single week. I got the babysitter. I got the restaurant we picked out. I started making investments, and I'll come back to this in a second, but I started taking my wife on a date night and asking her about her, not talking about business, not talking about the kids unless she wanted to. I just started asking her about her.
Mm.
And those two things have literally changed our marriage. Okay. It went from being disconnected, not having a whole lot of sex, feeling like roommates, to, feeling like teammates.
Yep.
And I'm not going to tell you that, hey, it's been all sunshine and roses since then. But when we fight, as we still do and couples do, and that's okay, we fight for what we want and we catch ourselves fighting each other, and we started fighting for what we wanted. But it started with me making a decision. And the thing is when you take ownership and responsibility for anything in your life, the result of where you're at in your life,
Yep.
you can be the one that leads that change. When if I would have blamed my wife and said, well, it's all her fault, then there's no way that that's going to change anything inside of me. And so inside of marriage, a lot of times we tend to blame the other person.
Yep.
And that makes us the victim. And so we never actually change the reality we're living in, because it's like, well, I'm doing all these things, but my wife, she's not changing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm saying I took responsibility, I took ownership, and I started creating the marriage that I wanted. I did it by making small investments every single day in messages. I did it by going on these date nights because my marriage was overdrawn.
Mm.
And if I'm overdrawn in my bank account, I got to start making deposits, right? So if I'm
Right.
overdrawn in my relationship, I got to start making deposits. And one of the terms that I use inside of our program called inside of habit-based lifestyle, inside of power couples, is called spending
Yep.
or investing. And so we're either spending time, thought, energy, or money, or we're investing time, thought, energy, and money. Okay. But every second of the day, we're choosing which one we're doing.
Gotcha.
And so I find most couples that are overdrawn have been spending more than investing.
Yep.
Okay. And so you could look at any result in your life, whether it's in your business, you're overweight. That means you've been spending
Right.
time, you've been spending thought, energy into what you're not. Like you said, you're a guy. Hey, I'm overweight, I'm fat. That's spending thought in what you're not versus investing, going out and doing the work, going out and going for a walk, going out, leaving my wife a message, going out and taking my wife on date night. That's an investment.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can focus on investing, I start getting my dividends paid back.
Right.
So,
Yeah. No, it's beautiful information. And I tell you, number one, I'm very proud of you for doing that, because a lot of people would have walked out. That's unfortunately what happens to 50 to 60% of the marriages today. My personal coach Michael Burt's wife, Natalie, wrote a wonderful book called Living with a Monster.
okay.
That's available. And it talks about this exact same subject, that one side of the relationship, if you're married to a driven type A person that is so focused on business, you have to understand that that's really kind of what defines them. They're so driven. They wake up every day hungry. He calls it prey drive, where they're hustling and grinding and they're focused on money and new customers, that the spouse and the children kind of take a back seat. And he says that at some point you have to create unity and support, where a lot of times it's just including your spouse in your business and bringing them in to do something, which you've done, obviously, because you host these retreats called Power Couple, and you do it as a couple. It's you and your wife working together as a couple, helping others that are going through that same struggle.
Right.
Let me ask, I guess, a little bit about your book, Man in the Mirror, and kind of what that speaks to, and more importantly, how people can get their hands on that book. I know it's available on Amazon, and of course, I know you have your podcast where you host to me, Habit-Based Lifestyles. I'm assuming you have a website. So share with my listeners really the best way for them to connect with you, and also to get information about your retreat, Power Couples, in the event there's an interest there. And more importantly, they're in a relationship that needs you to work your magic.
Yeah. So Man in the Mirror is really kind of my story about, looking in the mirror, and not recognizing myself. Like, looking like I believe that we look in the mirror, but we don't actually see ourselves. We look past ourselves. We try to hide parts of ourselves. And I believe that stopping and really looking in the mirror and looking at yourself so you recognize yourself, you see the gifts you have, you see the power you have, you see the potential you have, is really where all this starts. But part of that is admitting, sometimes we don't like who we see in the mirror.
Yeah.
And just like me, there's been times in my life, whether I was, 20 years old, or just how I was showing up as a husband, father, where it's like, hey, I really had to take a long, hard look in the mirror and say, listen, I don't like who this guy is. I don't like who this father is, this husband is, but I'm in control of changing that. And so it was really just a story about how I changed, each area of my life, and the things that I put into that. And that's more or less what my book is about, is just the trials and tribulations I've been through. I believe, we have to have like a mirror check every once in a while and really tune into, ourselves and what's going on. So yes, that is on Amazon. If you have any of your listeners reach out to me through email, I'll make sure they get a free copy of the book.
Wonderful. That'd be great. We always send out notes and a synopsis, so I'll make sure we definitely include that for sure.
Yeah, so I would love to do that. And also, so one of the things that I realized coaching couples over the last, year is, each person has to work on themselves first.
Mm-hmm.
And really start focusing on themselves first. And I fully believe that we have to take ownership on both sides and say, hey, maybe I don't like where my marriage is going. Maybe I don't like, where I'm at in my relationship, but I'm the only one who can work on me.
Yep.
And when I work on me, I can show up in a different place in my marriage. And so that's the first place we start. So everybody comes in through habit-based lifestyle. And from that, once someone's, kind of gotten themselves back in power, back in working on themselves, then they're ready to step inside of our program, which is called Power Couples. Because what happens a lot of times is when we're in a marriage, when we're in this place, is we want to bypass working on ourselves and go directly to working on the other person and being like, hey, you need to fix this and fix that. But when we do that, there's a lot of fingers pointing back at us.
Yep.
And so usually and generally when working on yourself takes it all of a sudden puts, all that focus on you and says, okay, listen, I'm going to take ownership and responsibility for me. They do it for themselves. And then when we show up together, now we're really ready, committed to work on each other.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Well, we're running out of time. I just want to thank you once again, Jesse, for making yourself available. You shared a lot of great content and you kept it real, which is the real most important part of being a great guest. It's not only sharing your past, sharing what you've learned in your own personal life, but also sharing how you've helped change others. Folks, again, this is Jesse Ewell, Habit-Based Lifestyle. I want to thank you, Jesse. And for anybody that would like to connect, reach out to me or visit Jesse's website, Habit-Based Lifestyle. And again, this is your host, Brad Blazer, and another great episode of Beast Nation.